The stage lights burned hot against his skin. 5 years old, and already Michael Jackson knew what it felt like to perform until his legs trembled and his voice cracked. While other children played hide-and-seek in backyards, he rehearsed dance steps in cramped rehearsal rooms. While they dreamed of cartoon characters, he dreamed of hitting the right note, of pleasing his father, of not making a mistake that would cost him everything. Gary, Indiana was a steel town where smoke rose from factories and hope seemed as distant as the stars. The Jackson family lived in a tiny house on Jackson Street, 9 children crammed into 2 bedrooms, sharing beds and dreams. Joe Jackson, their father, saw something in his sons that transcended the gray landscape of their industrial neighborhood. He saw talent. He saw escape. He saw dollar signs. But what he didn't see was the cost of pushing children into adult responsibilities before they understood what childhood meant. Michael was different from his brothers. Even at that tender age, something about him captured attention. His voice carried an emotional weight that seemed impossible for someone so young. When he sang, people stopped what they were doing. They leaned in. They felt something. But this gift came wrapped in barbed wire. Every note had to be perfect. Every step had to be precise. His father's belt taught him that lesson over and over again. The Jackson 5 exploded onto the music scene in 1969 like a meteor blazing across the sky. Michael was 11 years old when I Want You Back shot to #1. 11 years old when he appeared on Ed Sullivan. 11 years old when millions of people suddenly knew his name. The world saw a talented child with an infectious smile and nimble feet. They didn't see the boy who cried himself to sleep. They didn't see the child who looked out hotel windows at playgrounds below, watching kids his age living the life he would never have. Fame is a hungry beast, and it devoured Michael's innocence with terrifying efficiency. While his voice matured and his performances grew more sophisticated, something inside him remained frozen at 5 years old. That little boy never got to climb trees or scrape his knees learning to ride a bike. He never got to fail at something without consequences. He never got to just be ordinary, even for a moment. And as the years passed and the spotlight grew brighter, that lost childhood became an aching wound that nothing could heal. His brothers had each other, but Michael stood alone at the front. The pressure separated him from them, created a distance that fame only widened. He was the special one, the lead singer, the one who carried the group on his shoulders. At 12, at 13, at 14, he bore responsibilities that would crush most adults. Television appearances, recording sessions, concerts that stretched across continents. The machine of celebrity ground forward without mercy, and Michael was its fuel. Behind those bright eyes lived a loneliness so profound it seemed bottomless. He would later speak of looking out at crowds of screaming fans and feeling completely alone. Thousands of people knew his name, but nobody really knew him. How could they? He was still trying to figure out who he was beneath the performer, beneath the expectations, beneath the weight of being Michael Jackson. That question would haunt him for the rest of his life, growing more complex and painful as the years advanced and the world's fascination with him intensified into something resembling obsession. The gentle soul that would define Michael was already present in that young boy. He loved animals with a pure, uncomplicated affection. He cried at movies. He felt things deeply, painfully, beautifully. But gentleness doesn't survive well in the entertainment industry. It gets misinterpreted as weakness, exploited as vulnerability, mocked as naivety. And so Michael learned to protect that tender core by building walls around it, creating personas and defenses that would eventually become their own kind of prison. The transformation began with Off the Wall in 1979, but it was Thriller that changed everything. Released in November 1982, the album didn't just break records, it shattered them into fragments so small they could never be pieced back together. Michael Jackson, now 24 years old, became something the world had never seen before, a global phenomenon that transcended race, age, geography, and genre. He wasn't just famous. He was inescapable. The numbers tell one story. 7 top 10 singles. 37 weeks at #1. Over 70 million copies sold worldwide. 8 Grammy Awards in a single night. But numbers can't capture what Thriller actually meant. It was a cultural earthquake. When the title track's music video premiered, it wasn't just watched, it was an event. Families gathered around television sets. Schools talked about it the next day. The 40-minute short film directed by John Landis became a touchstone moment in pop culture, combining horror, dance, and storytelling in ways that redefined what a music video could be. Michael's artistry reached heights that seemed superhuman. The Moonwalk, debuted during the Motown 25 television special in 1983, became instantly iconic. He glided backwards across the stage as if gravity held no claim on him, and the world gasped collectively. His dancing combined the grace of Fred Astaire with the electricity of James Brown, filtered through his own unique vision. Every spin, every freeze, every gesture carried intention and meaning. He didn't just perform songs, he inhabited them, transforming music into physical poetry. But at the peak of this unprecedented success, cracks were already forming in the foundation. Michael was living in a fishbowl, and the entire world was watching. Every move he made became news. Every outfit was analyzed. Every friend was questioned. The media's fascination with him bordered on pathological. They studied his appearance, noting when his skin seemed lighter, when his nose looked different, when his behavior seemed eccentric. The gentle soul who loved animals and children, who visited hospitals and funded charities quietly, became reduced to headlines and speculation. The pressure of maintaining that level of success would have crushed most people. Michael responded by pushing himself harder, demanding perfection in every aspect of his work. Studio sessions lasted days. Dance rehearsals continued until dancers collapsed from exhaustion. He listened to playbacks hundreds of times, searching for imperfections only he could hear. This obsessive dedication created masterpieces, but it also fed an anxiety that gnawed at him constantly. Nothing was ever quite good enough. Every triumph came with the immediate pressure to do something even bigger, even better. Money poured in like a flood, and Michael spent it with the enthusiasm of someone who had never been allowed to just enjoy being young. He bought Neverland Ranch in 1988, transforming the property into the childhood wonderland he had never experienced. Amusement park rides, a zoo, a movie theater, game rooms, all of it an attempt to recapture something that could never truly be recovered. The ranch wasn't just a home. It was a time machine that didn't work, a desperate attempt to rewrite history by living the childhood he had missed, even though he was now 30 years old. The world saw the eccentricity and laughed. Wacko Jacko, the tabloids dubbed him, turning his pain into punchlines. They mocked his pet chimpanzee, his oxygen chamber, his high voice, his changing appearance. Every quirk became evidence of instability rather than signs of someone struggling under impossible circumstances. The media machine that had built him up now found profit in tearing him down. Newspapers competed to print the most outrageous stories. Television shows made him the butt of jokes. Comedians built entire routines around his strangeness. What they failed to understand, or chose to ignore, was that Michael's eccentricity wasn't madness, it was survival. When you've been performing since 5 years old, when you've never known privacy, when every relationship in your life has been complicated by fame and money, when you can't walk down a street without causing chaos, eccentric becomes necessary. Normal doesn't work when your life has never been normal. The amusement park rides weren't silly, they were therapy. The animals weren't props, they were companions who wanted nothing from him except care. The high gates around Neverland weren't paranoid, they were essential. Yet even at the peak, even when Thriller made him the biggest star on earth, Michael carried that sadness in his eyes. Watch interviews from that era. Behind the soft-spoken answers and shy smiles lived someone profoundly lonely, profoundly hurt, profoundly misunderstood. He had achieved everything a performer could dream of achieving, and somehow it wasn't enough to fill the emptiness left by that stolen childhood. Success, it turned out, was just another kind of cage. Bigger, more glamorous, but still locked from the outside. The first accusation came in 1993 like a bomb detonating in Michael's carefully constructed world. A 13-year-old boy claimed that Michael had molested him. The allegations made headlines globally, and suddenly the king of pop became the target of the most vicious media-feeding frenzy in entertainment history. The gentle soul who had spent millions visiting sick children in hospitals, who had opened his home to underprivileged kids, who spoke constantly about loving and protecting children, now stood accused of the most heinous betrayal imaginable. Michael maintained his innocence with a desperation that was painful to witness. His voice shook during a live broadcast where he addressed the allegations, his pain raw and visible. He spoke of being strip-searched by authorities, photographed in humiliating detail, treated like a criminal. The investigation invaded every corner of his life, turning his sanctuary into a crime scene. Police searched Neverland Ranch, seizing photographs and videotapes, looking for evidence of crimes that Michael swore had never happened. The case never went to trial. Michael settled with the boy's family for a reported $23 million in January 1994. His advisors told him it was the practical decision, that a trial would destroy him regardless of the verdict. But settling looked like guilt to many people. The court of public opinion convicted him instantly. Radio stations stopped playing his music. Sponsors dropped him. The adoration that had defined his career for decades curdled into suspicion and disgust overnight. Tabloids printed stories so outrageous they bordered on fantasy, and people believed them because they wanted to believe them. What the public didn't see was Michael falling apart behind closed doors. The investigation triggered something in him, a collapse of the carefully maintained walls that had protected his fragile psyche. He had always been thin, but now he became skeletal. His dependency on prescription medication, which had begun years earlier as pain management after a burn accident during a Pepsi commercial shoot, intensified into a dangerous addiction. Pills to sleep. Pills to wake up. Pills to numb the pain that was emotional but felt impossibly physical. His marriage to Lisa Marie Presley in 1994 seemed like an attempt to prove normalcy, to show the world he could have adult relationships, that he wasn't the strange, stunted man-child the media portrayed. But how do you build a genuine relationship when your entire life has been performance? When you don't know where Michael Jackson the icon ends and Michael Jackson the person begins? The marriage lasted less than 2 years, another failure added to the growing list of things that had gone wrong. The second accusation came in 2003, and this time there would be no settlement. A young boy who had appeared in a documentary with Michael claimed abuse. Authorities arrested Michael in a spectacle designed for maximum humiliation. Cameras captured him being processed, fingerprinted, and photographed. The trial that followed in 2005 stretched across 4 months of testimony, with prosecutors painting Michael as a predator and the defense arguing that the family was attempting extortion. Every day, Michael walked into that courtroom knowing that his entire legacy hung in the balance. The media circus outside was relentless. Helicopters circled overhead. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Fans and protesters shouted from opposite sides of barriers. Inside, prosecutors presented their case with clinical precision, while Michael sat at the defense table looking increasingly frail, increasingly broken. Some days he arrived in pajama bottoms after being hospitalized, his pain medication barely keeping him functional. The testimony was brutal. Prosecutors brought up every strange behavior, every questionable decision, every eccentric choice Michael had made. They twisted his love for children into something sinister, his innocence into manipulation, his gentleness into predation. They didn't just want to convict him of crimes, they wanted to destroy the very essence of who he was. And watching it happen, Michael seemed to age decades in months. The boyish features that had been his trademark grew gaunt. The bright eyes dimmed. The spark that had made him special seemed to flicker and fade. On June 13, 2005, the jury returned not guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. Michael was free, but the victory felt hollow. The trial had cost him everything that mattered. His reputation lay in ruins. His finances were devastated by legal fees and lost income. His health, both physical and mental, had deteriorated to crisis levels. Most devastating of all, his faith in humanity had been shattered beyond repair. How do you trust anyone after being accused of the worst crimes imaginable? How do you open your heart when the world has used your greatest virtue, your love for children, as evidence of monstrosity? Neverland Ranch, once his sanctuary, became unbearable. Police had invaded it, searched it, photographed every corner. The place that represented his dreams now reminded him only of nightmares. He left it and never truly returned, letting it fall into disrepair, unable to face the memories that haunted every room. The amusement park ride stood silent. The animals were relocated. The laughter of children that had once filled the air was replaced by an oppressive silence. Michael's heaven had become his hell. After the trial, Michael fled to Bahrain, accepting the hospitality of Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa. He needed distance from America, from the media that had crucified him, from the public that had watched his humiliation like entertainment. In Bahrain, he could walk without being mobbed. He could breathe without feeling cameras pointed at his face. He could pretend, for brief moments, that he was something other than Michael Jackson, the tabloid disaster. But geography couldn't heal what was broken inside him. The insomnia that had plagued him for years intensified into something approaching torture. Night after night, he lay awake, his mind replaying the trial, the accusations, the betrayals. His body refused rest, as if sleep meant vulnerability he could no longer afford. Prescription medications became his constant companions, prescribed by doctors who either didn't understand the danger or didn't care. Propofol, a powerful anesthetic meant only for surgical use, became his desperate solution. It forced unconsciousness when nothing else would. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, became his only anchor to something resembling normalcy. He had always wanted to be a father, to give his children the loving childhood he had never experienced. But his paranoia about their safety bordered on obsessive. He covered their faces with masks and veils in public, desperate to protect them from the scrutiny that had destroyed his own youth. Critics mocked this too, calling it bizarre, evidence of instability. They didn't understand that Michael knew better than anyone what fame could do to a child. He had lived it. He had suffered it. He would do anything to spare them that fate. Money problems mounted with terrifying speed. Michael had spent lavishly for decades, supporting family members, funding charitable causes, maintaining properties and staff, buying art and artifacts. The trial had drained millions more. His album sales, once astronomical, had plummeted after the accusations. Concert opportunities dried up as venues feared controversy. Neverland Ranch alone cost millions annually to maintain, and he wasn't even living there. His business manager presented him with figures that should have been alarming, but Michael seemed disconnected from financial reality, unable or unwilling to grasp how precarious his situation had become. In 2008, foreclosure loomed over Neverland. The sanctuary he had created, the dream he had built, was about to be seized by creditors. The symbolism was crushing, even his attempt to reclaim childhood was being taken from him. Friends and business associates scrambled to arrange financing, to postpone the inevitable. Michael, once worth hundreds of millions, was essentially broke. The earning power that had made him one of the wealthiest entertainers in history had been destroyed by scandal, poor management, and his own inability to say no to people who asked him for help. He moved around Europe, staying with friends, living in rented houses, searching for a place where he could feel safe. Ireland, France, Las Vegas, each location promised a fresh start that never materialized. The truth was that Michael carried his prison with him. It wasn't external. It was inside, built from trauma and pain and years of being hunted by a world that had once loved him. No mansion could keep it out. No country was far enough away. The damage was bone deep. His physical health deteriorated alongside his mental state. The plastic surgeries that had begun as modest adjustments had become something else entirely. His face bore little resemblance to the young man who had moonwalked into history. People debated the reasons: body dysmorphia, self-hatred, an attempt to erase his father's features from the mirror. Whatever the truth, the result was undeniable. Michael looked increasingly fragile, his skin stretched tight over delicate features, his frame painfully thin. He resembled a ghost of himself, haunting his own life. Yet the artist inside him never died. Even in exile, even broken, he thought about music. He spoke to friends about new albums, new tours, new ways to connect with audiences. Music had always been his truest language, the way he communicated what words couldn't express. Without performing, without creating, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The stage had defined him since childhood. Taking it away left him untethered, floating in a void where nothing made sense and nothing felt real. In 2009, opportunity arrived in the form of a concert residency at London's O2 Arena. This is it, they called it, a series of 50 shows that would re-establish Michael Jackson as the greatest entertainer alive. The announcement sent ticket sales into a frenzy. Hundreds of thousands of people desperately wanted to see him perform again, to witness the magic they remembered from his glory days. The promoters promised it would be a triumphant comeback, a redemption story for the ages. Michael committed to the shows with a mixture of excitement and dread. This was his chance to prove to himself and the world that he could still do what he was born to do. But the physical demands were enormous. 50 shows. Complex choreography. Vocal performances that required stamina he no longer possessed. At 50 years old, after years of physical decline and medication dependence, could he really deliver what was being promised? The pressure to succeed felt crushing, familiar in the worst way. Once again, everything rested on his shoulders. Once again, failure wasn't an option. The rehearsals for This Is It revealed a Michael Jackson who fought desperately to reclaim what time and trauma had stolen. He arrived at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, where preparations for the London shows were taking place, with characteristic perfectionism. Every light had to be positioned exactly right. Every sound cue had to hit precisely. Every dance step needed to match the precision he had once executed effortlessly. But his body betrayed him in ways that must have been terrifying. The movements that had once flowed naturally now required conscious effort. The voice that had soared now needed careful management. Those who worked closely with him during those final months saw someone caught between determination and desperation. Michael wanted this comeback to work. He needed it to work. His finances demanded it. His pride required it. His children needed to see their father as the icon the world remembered, not the broken man tabloids mocked. But the rehearsals took everything from him. He would arrive exhausted and leave even more drained. The insomnia intensified. The medication increased. The distance between who he had been and who he was now gaped like an unbridgeable canyon. Dr. Conrad Murray entered Michael's life as a solution to a problem everyone around him should have recognized was unsolvable. Michael needed sleep. Real sleep. The kind that doesn't come from pills or meditation or warm milk. The kind that requires actual peace, which Michael hadn't felt in decades. Murray, a cardiologist with financial problems of his own, agreed to provide that sleep through means that violated every ethical standard of medicine. He administered propofol nightly, turning Michael's bedroom into an improvised surgical suite, playing anesthesiologist without proper equipment or training. The people around Michael failed him in those final weeks. Some were too intimidated by his status to question his choices. Others were financially dependent on his success and couldn't afford to cause problems. A few genuinely didn't understand the danger, mistaking professional credentials for competence. But everyone saw the warning signs. The weight loss that made his clothes hang loosely. The moments of confusion during rehearsals. The occasional slurred speech. The trembling hands. These weren't secrets. They were visible proof that something was catastrophically wrong. On June 24, 2009, Michael rehearsed at the Staples Center for what would be the final time. Footage from that night shows him still capable of moments of brilliance. His voice on Earth Song carried emotional weight. His movements during Billie Jean hinted at the dancer he had been. But watching it knowing what came next makes every frame tragic. This was a man giving everything he had left, burning through reserves that didn't exist, trying to be Michael Jackson one more time even though Michael Jackson was already gone, replaced by someone who wore his face and carried his burden but no longer had the strength to bear it. He left the rehearsal after midnight, driven to his rented mansion in Holmby Hills. The house was massive and cold, temporary like everything else in his life had become. His children were there, sleeping in their rooms, unaware that this was their last night with their father. Michael went to his bedroom, where Dr. Murray waited with the propofol that would grant him the unconsciousness that medication could no longer achieve naturally. The ritual had become routine. For insertion, medication administration, Michael finally able to stop thinking, stop hurting, stop being Michael Jackson for a few hours. But something went wrong that night. Perhaps the dosage was miscalculated. Perhaps Michael's compromised health made his body react differently. Perhaps Murray, knowing Michael needed to wake for rehearsal, adjusted the medication without understanding the consequences. Whatever the reason, Michael stopped breathing. His heart stopped beating. And Dr. Murray, who should have been monitoring him constantly, wasn't paying attention until it was too late. The 911 call came at 12:21 p.m. on June 25, 2009. Paramedics arrived to find Murray performing CPR on Michael's bed, a medically pointless gesture that suggested panic rather than competence. They transported Michael to UCLA Medical Center, where doctors worked desperately to revive him. But revival was impossible. Michael had been deprived of oxygen for too long. His brain was damaged beyond repair. At 2:26 p.m., doctors declared him dead. Michael Joseph Jackson, 50 years old, had finally found the peace that life had never given him. The world's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News channels interrupted regular programming. Social media crashed under the volume of grief and shock. Millions of people who had spent years mocking him suddenly remembered why they had loved him in the first place. The music, the dancing, the joy he had brought them before everything went wrong. His album sales exploded as people rushed to reclaim connection to an artist they had taken for granted. The tributes poured in from fellow musicians, actors, politicians, and ordinary fans whose lives his art had touched. But the tributes felt empty somehow, arriving decades too late. Where was this compassion when Michael needed it? Where was this understanding during the trial, during the accusations, during the years of relentless mockery? The world mourned him after death but had tortured him during life. They built memorials to an artist they had helped destroy, celebrated a genius they had refused to protect. The hypocrisy was staggering, the collective guilt barely concealed beneath the grief. Michael's children appeared at his memorial service, Paris speaking through tears about her father's love, her voice breaking the hearts of millions. She described the man nobody else really knew, the father who played with them, made them laugh, told them they could be anything. Not Michael Jackson the icon, but Daddy, who made breakfast and helped with homework and tucked them in at night. Her words revealed the tragic divide between the public figure and the private person, between the monster tabloids created and the gentle soul who just wanted to be loved. The years since his death have brought some redemption. New generations discovered his music without the baggage of scandal. Documentaries explored his artistry rather than his eccentricities. The FBI released files showing their investigation found no credible evidence of wrongdoing with children. Slowly, painfully, the truth emerged. Michael Jackson had been destroyed by the combination of childhood trauma, relentless media persecution, and a world that refused to see him as human. He was the gentle soul the title promised, trapped in a spotlight that burned him alive while millions watched and millions more looked away. His legacy is complex and will remain so. But listen to human nature, and hear the vulnerability. Watch the smooth criminal video and see the artistry. Read about the millions he gave to charity, the hospitals he funded, the children he helped. Then remember that this was a man who never had a chance at a normal life, who was used by everyone who got close to him, who died alone despite being one of the most famous people on earth. Michael Jackson's tragedy wasn't that he died young. It was that he never got to truly live. The spotlight that made him an icon also made him a prisoner, and by the time people realized what they had done, it was far too late to save him.